What is up, folks? This is Addy Eds. This is Public Intelligence. Got a great guest today, Don Vi Jr., who is now a colleague of mine via the Rundown Live. We're both writers and contributors there. We're going to get into his work for not just that a Wisconsin-based outlet, but also for the Free Thought Project as well, an outlet of which he is also a contributor. His work history and take on current events, as well as some updates. So, Don, thanks for coming on the show, and please feel free to beef up your introduction and tell us more about yourself. And yeah, it's great to have you on.
It's fantastic to be here, brother. I'm really glad that you could have me on. And yeah, for people to know, we are colleagues now. I am the co-host of the Rundown Live alongside Kristan T. Harris. We've had Addy on the show for a few times now. Absolutely wonderful every time we've had him on. And now he is a colleague and co-worker and article writer for us. So that's amazing. It's great to have you with us. And I'm glad to be here. I'm a writer for the freethoughtproject.com. I'm also an affiliate of the G3 News Group via COVID19up.org. I've been writing for them for COVID-19 I've been writing for them, I think, since like last summer-ish, if not a little beforehand, or a little bit after, rather, excuse me. For Free Thought Project, I've been writing for them since November of 2019. Yeah, 2020. I'm really bad with my dates sometimes, which is weird because I'm a history buff. So I can rattle you off dates of things that happened in like 1066 without a problem. But if I'm trying to remember my own calendar, it's like, what year did that happen?
Sure. Wow, that's great. And where are you from originally? Where do you work out of now? Where are you based out of now? If you could share that with us, and then
Yeah.
School history or travel history, and I find that stuff interesting.
Oh yeah, well, I was born and raised in Central Virginia. I'm still here now, begrudgingly. I do want to get out of here because I like to travel. I've been to a number of places. I've been to Florida. I've been to Ohio. A number of other places. Never been out of the country yet. Would really like to. But yeah, born and raised here. Went to school here. My journey has been really interesting when you think about it because we were talking before we came on the show. Never in a million years did I think I'd be like a news broadcaster and a writer and whatnot. Like back when I was in school, I was just interested in getting out of there and maybe being a motorcycle mechanic or something like that. That's what I was kind of focused on. And then like I don't know, just like some sort of spark hit me. I think it was around 2012. I became really interested in the Ron Paul campaign and what he was doing for president. And I was kind of introduced to Paul around, not personally introduced to, unfortunately. I'd love to meet him in person. But I was introduced to his ideas around 2018, or not 2008. I'm sorry. Introduced to his ideas around 2008, kind of somewhat. And then the 2012 campaign. I really started to become familiar with his platform on things, and it really started to shift my ideas more towards a libertarian and freedom-based standpoint. And it was around 2013-14 that I really became curious about what was really going on, because I guess I've always had an inquisitive nature. Like even since I was a child, I was reading history books and questioning authority and all of that fun stuff, and just always curious about, if there's something more in our world. Like something in my guts always told me that there's, always something a little bit more than what we were officially being told. So it was around like 2013, 14, I kind of started to really dive into the quote unquote truther community and really, find some of these alternative sites like the Free Thought Project and Activist Post and Waking Times and the anti-media, and started to learn a lot of stuff from them. And, the more I became impassioned about a lot of stuff that I cared about, whether it be the environment or, foreign policy, being a very big anti-war person myself, which in and of itself is a strange transition because I used to not be. I used to want to join the military. I'm very thankful that I did not go that route. Things prevented me from doing that. At the time, I was very upset, and now looking back, it was a blessing in disguise. But so I start learning more about these topics, and it just kind of inspired me to get more active and get more involved. And I just kind of found that writing is my niche. It's my thing, because I've been writing since I was like 10, 8, 9 years old, something like that. And so I just kind of started putting my thoughts down. It started with like, just Facebook posts about, hey, folks, we should probably care about this thing that happened, and we're not hearing much about it from the mainstream media. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. So I started my own channel page called Break the Matrix in September of 2018, and the goal of which was just to bring a more centered, rational, objective view to a lot of the stuff that's going on, and really just bring people news from all spectrums, just so they can get a well-rounded idea of what's really going on in this world, as opposed to what we're being told. Because the deeper you dive into it, obviously it becomes as far apart as night and day. And there's just like so much political divide and false dichotomy going on, that I wanted to, in a way, start to contribute to help wake people up and break the matrix, as the name indicates. So I've been doing that for a few years, and just kind of writing out posts. I never had a website. I still don't have an official website. Now I have a Substack that I publish on sometimes. But I would just, research things, find evidence. I'd write out posts. Sometimes they'd be, a couple hundred words. Sometimes they'd be a couple thousand words, depending on what I had to say. And, I'd just drop all the source links at the bottom, and, there it is. There's my article. There's your news. Take it as is. Did that for a couple years. And then through essentially just kind of networking in a way, adding people on Facebook and just trying to, poke at people who are actually in the business, essentially trying to learn from them. I met a guy named John Vibes, who is also a writer for the Free Thought Project. He's been an activist for a long time. Fantastic guy. He's not much in the scene anymore now. He's more focusing on personal stuff. But I was conversing with John, and one day I asked him, I said, what do you think about me throwing my idea out to Jason Bassler, who is one of the co-founders of the Free Thought Project? I said, what do you think about me throwing out to Jason, seeing if they would like to get some of my stuff and feature it on Free Thought Project? And he said, well, couldn't hurt. Don't be upset if they don't take your first or second thing you submit to them, because that's just kind of how the business goes. But I mean, definitely, it couldn't hurt, and just keep trying. So I went on ahead, and thanks to John's encouragement, I got the courage to message Jason, and I pitched the idea. I was like, hey, here's some stuff that I've written before. I would, like to see if maybe you guys would like to feature it on your website. And I was fully prepared for a no, because you have to be, just to be, ready for it. And I was like, oh, okay, if they don't accept it, then of course, I'll just be like, I've talked to him, so now I have that in a way. So if I have something else I think they might like, well, I can send them that. But to my pleasant surprise, they loved it. It was one of the first things that one of the first big deep dive articles that I wrote. It was like a 5,000 word analysis of Trump's foreign policy, and essentially of American foreign policy as a whole. And,
wow.
Yeah. And so he sent it to the other co-founder of the Free Thought Project, Matt Agorist, who looked it over, and he said he loved it. And yeah, it was essentially, there was that. That's how I kind of got into it. They wanted to feature it, and I was like, that's awesome. And then I happened just to see a news story about Jeremy Hammond, who is an anonymous, like he's in the hacktivist group Anonymous.
Okay,
And
sure.
he was getting out of prison. So I asked Matt if I could write an article about that. So within the course of about a week, I wrote the Jeremy Hammond article, and they published my 5,000 word Trump foreign policy article. And essentially, those are the two first pieces I got published on the Free Thought Project. And from there, it's just kind of off to the races. I've been a contributor ever since. I started helping with them, doing stuff backstage, social media management, researching, all that sort of stuff. So, now I'm a full-on member of the team, and it's been a really fun ride. And it's just kind of crazy to me because, guys like John and Matt and Jason, along with many other individuals, but given the fact that I, now work with them, like, I look up to them. Of course, they inspired me to get into this business. And it's like, I remember the first time I had a phone call with Jason, before I even really started writing and contributing to the Free Thought Project completely. I was kind of fanboying out. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to Jason freaking Bassler. And and he was really flattered by it. And
Yeah.
it was just crazy to me that now I can actually work with these people that taught me so much and educated me about so many things through their work. And now I'm contributing to that and helping and hopefully, educating more people about stuff that continues to go on in our crazy, crazy world.
Yeah, yeah, I had a similar experience with an author who I'm not gonna mention it, but people could probably figure out who it is, which I'm, embarrassed about right at the now I am, because it's like I try to be more professional, but sometimes you just can't help it with the admiration you have for how people's work have helped you have a greater understanding of the world. And I've interviewed both of those guys, so I think they're, pioneers. They're in my book actually, Jason and Matt. They're both so prolific.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great, great, great dudes, for sure. And I love covering their work because it's so necessary and it doesn't get a whole lot of shine, like it should. I think they
Absolutely.
do get shine, obviously, but like they should get more. Obviously, being censored
Yeah,
doesn't
the
help
the
things.
2018 purge was just absolutely insane because we saw it begin with Alex Jones, and I'm not ashamed to admit that Jones is also one of my big influences because I remember back in the day when he was more centered, more libertarian. He helped wake me up to things like 9/11 and the police state and things like that. Um, I don't really follow him much anymore. I can't say that I follow him anymore at all, actually, because his views changed and no longer align with mine. But I'll always respect the work that he did back in the day that played such an important role of waking me up to a number of certain things. And it started with him. And in the very beginning, we warned, even if you let somebody like Alex Jones, who, whether you like him or not, is still a human being and still has a right to free speech, um, if you kick him off the internet, it will not stop with him. And we
Yeah,
very much saw that become the case in October of 2018 when the infamous purge happened. And then, excuse me, the purge happened, and then we saw everybody get lumped into the Alex Jones circle, even if they completely disagreed with 99% of where he stood. That's where they got lumped in with. And so guys like Free Thought Project and Dan Dix of Press for Truth, We Are Change, Anti-Media, and so many other huge independent media influencers, all whom played a massive role in inspiring me, as I would assume you and many others, all got thrown into that camp and just completely shut down and wiped from the internet. Around that time, Free Thought Project was getting millions of hits a week. We're slowly building up our following again, but that was before I was associated with them. But I've heard from Jason and Matt the insurmountable hit that they took when that purge took place, and it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just repugnant that we have this sort of censorship of free speech happening,
Mhm.
particularly of individuals who are simply trying to present a different perspective and a different point of view, oftentimes with the overwhelming majority of the times factual information. Nobody's perfect, of course. We get things wrong. When we do get things wrong, we admit it and we correct it. It's you can't say much of the same for the mainstream media. They often peddle lies, and then when they get called out, they just pretend like it didn't happen.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
most of the independents, they actually have a thing called integrity, which is, something that we need more of nowadays. And,
yeah.
it's the fact that we're seeing this just complete devastation take place upon the right to not only speak freely, but to think freely. You know, it's like how, because I don't know about you, I grew up reading 1984. It was assigned reading in school. So we had to like read it and then do a book report on it, like eighth grade English class or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it's Orwellian doesn't even kind of feel like an appropriate enough word at this point for all of the craziness, not just in the past 2 years. Like the past 2 years have been outright insane. But even like 2018, 2016, like things have just been spiraling into a rabbit hole of Orwellianness that just goes beyond anything George Orwell could have thought of.
Yeah, it's still astounding to me how some people aren't picking up on this darkness, that's
Mhm.
creeping up, to put it euphemistically. But who else has been your influences, besides the people you've mentioned so far, on your writing or just thought in general? And I also wanted to ask what you first started writing about, and if, like, was it geopolitics back when you were 11?
Uh, well, back when I was 11, actually, I was more so interested in theology. I grew up in a Protestant household, um, but we never really thankfully, I didn't grow up in one of those households that forced religion on you. It's like you have to go to church and you have to believe this because, even as a young kid, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge history buff. So yeah, I'd read things about Greece and ancient Rome and Egypt and whatnot, and as a young child, I just thought to myself that it doesn't make sense to me that there's only one set of beliefs. And I'm not criticizing anyone that only has one set of beliefs. It's your prerogative to believe what you want to believe. It's that thought process that led me to research multiple different religions and beliefs and point of views. And so that was actually what kind of started getting me into wanting to learn more, just about pretty much anything in general, because learning about theology and ancient history, ancient beliefs, the religious beliefs of the Greeks and the Romans, of course, leads me into learning more about their culture in general. How they existed as a peoples, and of course that leads to archaeology and anthropology, and just becoming interested in the whole subject in a nutshell. And so that's kind of where it started, my curiosities, and they just sort of started to evolve because I lived with my grandmother, and she has this bookshelf, and I actually have the bookshelf now. It became mine after I moved out. And she had all these books on there about ancient history and lost books of the Bible, for example, because she was a very devout Christian, and she even was curious and had questions and whatnot. And so there's lost books of the Bible and apocrypha and different interpretations and you know just all sorts of curiosities. But I would say when it came to my research into government related topics, it probably started around the time I was in middle school. Um, as you can tell, I'm probably a little eccentric. So I was very curious about UFOs and stuff of that nature. So I remember I would do research in my art class and computer class because those are the only two classes we had access to computers in back in the day. Um, and I'd be sitting in class and looking up stuff about Area 51 or the Arizona Lights or something like that, and then I'd be going to the library and printing off documents and whatnot about it. And mind you, I'm what 11, 12 years old at this point, and so I just got curious about you know if if it seems like they're hiding something, because regardless of what someone believes about UFOs or extraterrestrial life or whether or not they walk among us or whatever, they're hiding something, and they've proven as much within just the past several years of official documents that they've declassified from the Department of the Navy and a number of other places that it openly admitted, yeah, back in 2000, 1990, we were lying about some stuff. um, and so that was my thought process even then. It clearly seems like they're covering up something. Don't know what, but clearly something. So then the thought process was, well, what else? What else have they kind of, fudged the truth on a little bit? So then I started looking into other things like 9/11. And as you know, that opens the floodgates for holy crap, we have been heavily deceived.
Yes, 9/11 was a big one, and it was a unique for me in a way. I think certainly different from you, and I would say different from a lot of people, just because of when it happened for me. I was in kindergarten,
Mhm.
so it wasn't like a friend of mine told me it was actually traumatizing for them when years later this person told me they were crying, and I was like, wow, because I was so young, I didn't fully, it didn't affect me in the same way because I didn't really understand what was going on, right? Because I was so young. But nonetheless, I was able to understand in hindsight what happened. But in that sense, it was like that sort of societal traumatization after effects were already ingrained before I could experience them in a way, you know. But then now we have this new 9/11
Mhm.
slash 1918, you know, contrived pandemic situation, which is, you know, I would say traumatic as well.
Yeah, traumatic and also mind-boggling with the approaches that we've seen from world governments.
Yeah.
9/11 for me, um, it was particularly odd because, like, I always like something in me, even as a young child, because I don't think I'm much older than you because I was in, I think, first grade when 9/11 happened. You mentioned you were in kindergarten, so I'm assuming I'm
Okay.
only like
Sure.
1 or 2 years older than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but when 9/11 happened, we had just kind of gotten into class, got settled in. We got in at like 8 a.m., something like that. So we had just gotten settled in for the day, and then the announcement came over the speakers that all the teachers had to be called into the teachers council for an emergency meeting. And then a few minutes later, they came back in, and it was obvious that they were shaken. Something had happened, and then we got an announcement that we were being let to go home, which not a lot of schools did that. I was actually surprised when I heard from a friend of mine that not a lot of schools throughout the country
No.
um, actually released their kids. A lot of them went on lockdown. But in my school, for some reason, they called the parents and said, "Come pick up your kids now."
Hmm.
So we got released. We went home. My mom and dad were freaking out, obviously, as you can understand. Because anytime I talk about 9/11, my mom will recount it to this day. She said she thought the world was ending. Like
Oh gosh.
legit, she legit thought the end times had showed up because it's like it's unfathomable because people in our generation and their generation, the
Right.
only thing you could really compare it to that in ours and their generation weren't around to actually witness was Pearl Harbor is the only thing
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
can apropos enough to actually compare it to. Um, and of course, they me being a young kid, first grader, don't watch the TV. Of course, me being me, I don't listen. So I sneak around the corner and I check out the TV. And being that young, you don't grasp the severity of what you're looking at when you see those events unfold. The towers were on
Right.
fire, people were
Yeah.
screaming, constant coverage. But even not really being able to, at that young, comprehend the tragedy that just took place, I remember very much something inside me said, my young little brain doesn't know what just happened, but something terrible just happened and the world had just changed forever. And
Hmm.
of course, hindsight, we were right. Absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
Years later, um, looking into it and starting to sort of have questions about what happened that day, because once I get more interested in studying politics, of course, by the time I get interested in studying that stuff, we are well into the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, anti-war protests, pro-war people, like counter-protesting, like all sorts of craziness. Anybody that was around in that era, like the early to mid Bush days, you remember things were a bit crazy on that front. And so, of course, me getting into studying politics, that's something you have to look at because it literally set the goalpost of everywhere and everything that the American government did and everywhere they went, and how it interacted with its own people. You
Yeah.
have to look at 9/11. And thusly, I did. And, of course, originally, because I had heard like the conspiracy theories, oh, it was an inside job. Oh, they knew it was going to happen. Oh, two planes brought down 3 towers and the tower couldn't have collapsed in this amount of time doing this, that, and so blah, 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 blah. I originally went into it to debunk those talking points because I thought no way in hell is like, yeah, the government's nefarious. They've done terrible things. I didn't even know a fraction of what I know now then. But even then, I was like, yeah, they're nefarious. They've done terrible things. But no way, absolutely not. Could they have lied to us on such a grand scale as these conspiracy theorists claim? So I went into it to debunk it, but of course, I'm naturally try to be a rational, objective person. So I did look at all sides and all evidence and all their claims. And what is the evidence? Why do you believe the things that you do? What do you use to back up your arguments? And I came out of that journey completely flipped my opinion. And I was like, man, something happened. And it's bad. And they knew it was bad. I think what really set it in stone for me was early on. And by set in stone, I don't necessarily mean like I know for a fact that it happened this way. But what really set in stone for me early on that they did, at least to some degree, lie to us about something was when I learned about Operation Able Danger. And the name escapes me now. I hate it because I'm on the spot and I can't remember his name. But when I'm not on the spot, I can blurt out names and ranks and whatnot, like nothing. But Operation Able Danger was a program that was run by a high-ranking lieutenant colonel.
Is that Hugh Shelton?
No, Anthony Schaefer. There it is.
Anthony Schaefer. Okay.
Yeah, it was an intelligence program run by Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. And essentially, and Schaefer has attested to this multiple times since then, they gathered intelligence that there were terrorist cells affiliated with Al-Qaeda in the United States leading up to the attacks that they had credible evidence were planning attacks. And they gave it to the FBI, and someone from up top, they don't know who, shut it down and did not let them act on it. And that right there, right out of a lieutenant colonel's mouth tells you there's more to the story than what they tell us about 15 dudes with box cutters, because the deeper you start going into it, you start looking at Donald Rumsfeld and that missing, $20 trillion from September 10th that he went on Fox News talking about, we can't happen to find it. And then it just
2.3, wasn't it? Was it 2.3 trillion?
Yes, that's what it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but just so many aspects. And even now, just in the past, was it 2017, I believe, they authorized the declassification, though heavily redacted, of some of the 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission report. And even those redacted versions completely discredit the official count of events because it proves the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia did, in fact, directly fund Mohammed Atta and some of the hijackers. And they lied to us about it. The Bush administration lied to us about it. They continued to do business with Saudi Arabia, even though they knew this. The Obama administration lied to us about it. The Trump administration, for the most part, continued to lie to us about it, even though Congress declassified those redacted documents just due to the simple fact that Trump continued to do business with them. That was part of his whole campaign. The Saudis were a part of 9/11, and we know it. I'm going to declassify all the documents unredacted, and we're going to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. Then he gets into office, and I guess the documents thing was because Congress knew that he might actually declassify them all unredacted, so they took it upon themselves to declassify them in a redacted format, I suppose.
Yeah.
But then he continues to do and actually signs the largest arms deal in U.S. history to the tune of $350 million, or was it million or billion? I think it might have been billion. I'll have to double check that stat. But regardless, the largest weapons sale in U.S. history to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The same people that were involved, we know for a fact, in 9/11, the same people that he accused of being involved with 9/11, turning around and doing business with them. But going back to our main point, not to get off on a tangent ranting about one administration or the other because they're all useless puppets. Getting back to our original point, learning more about the history of 9/11 and
right, yeah.
Something that I don't like to use the word expert, but I consider myself fairly knowledgeable about is clandestine operations and covert warfare, because I've spent many a night, toiling away, burning the midnight hour, as it were, burning the moonlight, reading a plethoras of declassified documents and whatnot, just kind of sort of learning about what were they doing, what were these projects for. So you learn about things like Operation Ajax, in which the United States government, the CIA, along with Britain's MI6, used agent provocateurs, essentially, to facilitate a color revolution in Iran, and that led to the 1953 overthrow of the Shah of Iran, completely for oil. That's all it was for. The CIA and MI6 and their own documents, Operation Ajax, for folks out there listening, you can go look it up, overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran in 1953 for oil, for resources, because the Shah would not bow down to the West's demands. And that sort of sets the tone for U.S. foreign policy. And tying that into 9/11, we see time and time again the U.S. government does business with the people it claims to hate, with the people it claims to oppose, the extremists. So in late 1980, early 1981, and beginning in late 1970, so like 1979, the Carter and then Reagan administrations authorized a program called Operation Cyclone, in which the CIA and some U.S. Special Forces were going to Afghanistan, and they were training ragtag militant groups of fighters, like different tribal fighters, bringing them together, training them, arming them, and supporting them in their fight against the Soviet incursion, because this was during the Soviet-Afghani War. So they were training these fighters, and they were known as the Mujahideen, and their leader just so happened to be a guy by the name of Osama bin Laden, who was a Saudi logistics specialist and the primary asset for the CIA on the ground. So when you start to learn, when you realize that the main perpetrator of 9/11 was a friggin' CIA asset, trained, funded, supported by our own intelligence assets, it opens a lot of doors and a lot of questions. Like, because when you look at CIA operations and how they work, they don't just cut these people loose after they're done with them and kind of cast them into the wind. And they keep tabs. Yes. They keep tabs on every single person they work with, even if they're not an asset anymore. Like Muammar Gaddafi, for example. He was a Western-backed asset for a period of time. Then he turned around, flipped the script, and said, I don't want to work with you people anymore. And it soured their relations. But for a time, before the U.S. really started messing with Libya, for a time, he was just kind of neutral, and they weren't messing with him, but they were keeping tabs on him. And of course, we know now that's why Gaddafi is no longer with us, because as the WikiLeaks documents prove, as Hillary Clinton's own personal emails prove, the U.S. facilitated his assassination for oil and for gold, and to ensure that he was not able to establish certain currencies in Libya and essentially pose a threat to Western hegemony in that region of the world. As opposed to that whole story of, there was a civil uprising and his people took him out. No, it was the CIA, and now we know that. So my point being, they keep tabs on all of these people. So how the largest intelligence gathering agency in the world, being the Central Intelligence Agency, with the incredible surveillance apparatus that they have, which is largely illegal thanks to what was revealed by Edward Snowden, this world-encompassing panopticon of surveillance,
yes,
with the largest funded, highest funded intelligence agency in the world, how you did not know your own guy was planning a major, like Pearl Harbor style attack that just doesn't hold water. You had to know something.
Right. Yes. And then there's the airline stocks being shorted, connected to a company that got deputized, connected to the CIA. I just am hoping, I think more and more people are, wising up to who this group is, what they do, because it's not good things that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. frequently, because I also do some graphic design on the side for like Break the Matrix and whatnot. I make some informative memes. I don't like to call them memes because memes like has that like haha funny stigma to it, so I call them infographics. But it's
Oh,
essentially,
nice, nice.
it's got a picture and some words on it, and it tells you something. You see them all over the place. Free Thought Project, we use them all the time. To just like make a point,
Sweet.
because again, excuse me, I'm sorry.
What programs do you use to make those?
I honestly, I just downloaded some apps off my off Google Play on my phone and just started messing around with them. And now I have like 3 or 4 of them that I trust that have good
Okay.
effects in them. And I think one of them is called like Photo Editor. They're like, all of them have really generic names. But
Sure, sure.
I like them and they work really well.
Cool.
So one that I share quite frequently, it's a picture of one of the Bohemian Grove meetings, and the caption says, "I'm going to tell my kids this is our government because it really is," and it's true, and it's a very simple statement, but it's profound and it needs to be repeated more often, because for anyone who doesn't know, understanding what and who Bohemian Grove is sort of crucial to getting a look behind the curtain, so to speak, at who really runs the world and who really controls things. Bohemian Grove is a secret society that for the longest time they said didn't exist until they admitted that it existed in the early 2000s, after Alex Jones actually infiltrated their compound and got video of ceremonies and rituals taking place. And that's kind of what put him, like, he was already on the map in like 1999ish, but it was like when he and Mike Hansen broke into Bohemian Grove, that's what really put them on the map. And so Bohemian Grove is essentially a secret society that takes place in the California redwoods. It's a redwood grove, and they have a giant Moloch statue of an owl. There's debate on whether or not that it's Moloch or another deity, but it's a giant owl statue, and it's wild stuff because we have this on video now, as well as like some of their like program for the evening. Like, this is at 8 o'clock we're doing this, and at 9 o'clock we're doing that sort of thing, that Alex and them brought back. And it's like we have video of our leaders, quote unquote, I lose the term very loosely, our leaders, wearing these robes and conducting strange occultic type rituals. They call it the cremation of care. And it is, at least from what we can confirm, there's speculation that it may be more sinister than this, but from what we can 100% confirm, it is at least a mock child sacrifice. Some people theorize that actual sacrifices are happening. We don't have the evidence to officially confirm that, so I'm not going to proliferate that idea. But what we know is that they're at least using like straw and like wooden effigies of children and sacrificing them to this deity, which historically, if you look at the history of Moloch, he was a Babylonian child sacrifice deity. And these are the rituals that these people are conducting. And it's not just Bohemian Grove. And, for people kind of stuck in the paradigm, it's not just one side or the other either. We have politicians from the left, politicians from the right, because the left wing and the right wing are connected to the same bird, folks. And it's just like, you can do what you want. Of course, me being a huge, like, I'm a voluntarist. I mentioned earlier, like, libertarianism. Like, libertarianism is a philosophy. Is kind of how I got introduced to, like, more liberty mindset. But I'm a voluntarist. Essentially, you can call me an anarchist. I believe in freedom, like absolute freedom. As long as you're not hurting someone else or infringing on their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, do whatever the hell you want. So, like, can all of our politicians, can they get together and do these weird rituals and wear robes and burn effigies of children to a sacrifice deity? Sure, do that. It's weird, but that's your right. But we should probably know about that. The American people should be told, like, hey, this is what your leaders are up to, and it's really creepy. So maybe you should, put a little more consideration into the people that you put in power, because they have the right to do it, sure, but it clearly indicates some sort of level of strangeness that you might not wanting making decisions over your lives. And it's not just Bohemian Grove, like I mentioned. there are other aspects that we know from the 2016 Clinton documents. They're involved in things like spirit cooking, where they have Adriana
Mhm.
Abramovic. I think her name is. Um,
Martina, right? Isn't it Martina
yeah.
Abramovich?
Okay. Yes. Thank
Is that
you.
it?
Yeah, Abramovich. And they essentially get together and they have these dinners, and there's
Marina? Is it Marina? Marina?
Mariana. I don't know how to pronounce it, but yeah, Abramovich, something like that. But they
Yeah,
get
Marina
together.
Abramovich, yeah.
Yeah, they get together and they have these dinners and trying to keep it as least gross as possible. There's a lot of body fluids involved and like strange rituals happening, like incantation and whatnot, and like this is what the ruling class is up to.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's like reality is really stranger than fiction. You'd see this and you think like this is some bad sci-fi movie or like a horror drama conspiracy flick, but it's real life, and it really, brings the phrase home that reality is stranger than fiction more often than not.
Yes. Yes, it does. And that is something that, I only have recently come to, be aware about, studying history and such. But I wanted to ask you about travel. You mentioned you would like to go travel to other countries. Where would that be, do you think?
Oh, well, I would love to go to Mexico and Japan first and foremost. Like
Wow,
I
why
don't
is
know
that?
why. I've just always felt some sort of big draw to Japan. I love the culture. I love the food.
Oh,
Um,
man, the food
every,
is great. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
It's amazing.
Um,
It's Japanese food, Mexican food, Italian food.
mhm.
I'm all yeah, I'm good with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Yeah, and it's just like the culture, the food, the history of Japan is something I've always been interested in. I find it very fascinating, especially like the samurai era. Just sort of like the ancient imperial Japan sort of uh, timeline is just something that at least here in Western culture we don't talk about
No,
often
no, no.
enough, and
Yeah.
I think it's just so interesting, because when you think about how far it's stretched, like here's something that'll puzzle your brain. Um, there's a picture that I saw one time of shortly after the Great Sphinx of Giza was excavated, or maybe it was just before. I think it was still covered in some sand up to a certain point. So this is like either early 1900s or late 1800s. I don't remember exactly when it was excavated, but it was a picture of samurai who had made a trip to Egypt just to see it, I guess. It's like samurai standing in front of, a partially excavated sphinx. And I was like, it's crazy to me that, here these two different, seemingly from different time things,
Mhm.
and like, it's just wild. I'm kind of rambling, but,
No, no, please. This is great. Yeah, I actually lived in Japan for a year, and I didn't know that about that anecdote you just shared. And I wasn't on the mainland. I was actually on Okinawa, but
hmm,
it's a culture in its own, but Japan nonetheless. And yeah, I do miss the food. I have to say the food and yeah, certain things I don't miss. It's very strict culture in certain ways with in a way that the West isn't. But
mhm.
then they're also you know, they love their alcohol for sure. And
I did not know that. I mean, me being Irish, I should know that.
sure, sure. Well, as far as I know, for example, like marijuana is illegal everywhere in Japan. But then again, it's not like Mexico where you can get prescriptions, pretty much any prescription you want over the counter, right? Whereas in the States,
Right.
you can't do that. So, and then you said Mexico too, right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
sort of the same thing. Like I've always kind of had this feeling like I'd like to go to Mexico, like for no particular rhyme or reason. It just seems like a fascinating place.
You got a
Obviously,
calling.
again, the food is really good. I've had authentic Mexican food from friends of mine who grew up in
Oh yeah.
Mexico and cooked me some dinner sometime, and I was like, man, I need to get this more
Yeah.
often. But I just like to travel and see the world in general. It's like I would love to go to Alaska for a little bit, spend some time there. I have this big dream of mine of wanting to go take a river cruise down the Amazon River in,
Wow,
in,
that
in the
sounds fun.
rainforest, and I
Yeah.
would love to do that. Um, So hopefully a lot of the authoritarianism that we're seeing from governments around the world, because at one point I wanted to go to Australia and Paris as well. That's not
Yeah.
happening anytime soon. But
And that's one thing. That's one of my biggest fears, Don, is that we won't have BC travel experiences again. It
right,
was where you could just go to another country, and it's not a huge. You don't have to be tracked like you're some sort of zombie or something like that. Not to
precisely.
mention, I don't know. I mean, North Korea is a special case. Like when I learned that they basically tortured that kid who just like stole a poster. Did you hear about that?
When was that? Was this recent?
It was a few years ago. I want to say it was like 2018 or 2017. This
I may
kid
have heard
like
that.
stole a poster but then put it back or something like that.
Hmm,
And they arrested him, and then when they released him, he was like a vegetable. Like I don't know what happened, but
that's
uh,
terrible.
yeah, man, I was like, oh, that's dark, man. So that's a country I'm not sure I'm gonna visit. Not that
Yeah, no.
I mean, I heard as long as you follow the rules, you're good. So who knows?
Yeah,
But
I mean, I'd like to go to South Korea. Seoul seems like it'd be a nice city.
yeah, fastest internet in the world, South Korea. I
Really?
would like to go to South Korea.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. It has something to do with the way their cities are set up
Uh,
geographically or physically. But yeah, those are some great options there. Unfortunately, Mexico is as violent as it has ever been. Um,
Yeah. Well, in some parts, I actually have a colleague of mine that lives down in Puerto Vallarta, and
yeah,
he
yeah.
said multiple times, he's like, "Look, I've uh, lived in Canada, I've lived in the United States, I've lived in Egypt and Montenegro and a bunch of other places around the world. I've actually been
Wow.
held up and mugged 3 times in the United States, but I've never felt unsafe down here in Puerto Vallarta." So
Sure,
there's,
sure.
there's
No, there's safe
um,
there's safe spots in Mexico for sure, as long as you're not, being dumb, you know where to go. And yeah, that's one thing too about I'm sure he was in an American city. I can almost guarantee it. It's like
yeah.
American cities are
Yeah, because
dangerous.
I remember, a colleague of mine, whom I'm sure you've heard of, Derek Bros. He runs the Conscious Resistance Network. He currently they live down in Zihuatanejo, I believe. And recently, someone broke into his place. He told the story on his page, and he got his laptop stolen in the process of making a documentary a couple months ago. And like people were in the comments like, "Oh yeah, this is Mexico, it's violent and whatnot." And he says, "Look, let me shut this down real quick because I grew up in Houston, Texas. Houston is just as, if not more, violent than statistically Zihuatanejo. So the whole prejudice idea that Mexico is just inherently violent, shut it down." So I'm glad that there are people like my colleague Josh and Derek as well, who get that point out there. Because, like, don't get me wrong, of course, there are places, like Juarez, for example, cartel country, that are just really violent, and it's probably best to avoid those places. But
Yeah,
it seems to be there's a weird, like, American idea that Mexico is just kind of like the wild lands, and that's not really the case.
sure, sure. Yeah, I've only been once. I was very young,
Mm-hmm.
6 maybe,
Oh
Tijuana,
wow.
and very different Mexico, very different America. So Um, yeah, but the name of that student was Otto Warmbier. Thanks to
Yes, I do
yeah,
remember that. Thank you for the commenter who pointed that out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He did. He died shortly after coming home to the U.S. So
Mhm.
thanks to Helly, and Wild Tangent on that. So yeah, that was very depressing to learn about, to say the least. But I wanted to ask you about your appearance. Well, you are a co-host for the Rundown Live, and yeah, I mean, can you fill us in on what you've been covering recently, Don? Because, like I said, I've had a bit of some blinders on, which I'm slowly taking off. But again, it's just balancing the breadth versus depth thing. But yeah, what's
Right.
the updates? What you've been working on the past couple weeks? What's
All
caught
right.
your eye in the world of news?
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been a number of things that have been, sort of going on that we've been covering. We tend to try to, do a show from, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. For those that want to check it out, you can check us out on rundownlive.com, or anywhere you see live podcasts, essentially, or the kgrdb.com, which is, my background, KGRA. That's where we're syndicated from internationally.
I was wearing my KGR shirt yesterday.
Nice. Very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I still need to get one of those actually. But yeah, so recently, especially today's show, we spent a lot of time talking about what's going on in Ottawa, Canada, with the massive Freedom Convoy trucker protest.
Yes.
And certainly recently, a lot of other uprisings, this previous weekend, not this past weekend, but the one beforehand.
Okay. Yep.
There was a massive protest in Washington, D.C. I believe you were there, the Defeat the
Yes.
Mandates protest.
Yes, sir.
And so
Yes.
we were covering that. And I've also been, me being a big, foreign policy covering kind of person, I've also been talking about the developments that have been happening regarding Eastern Europe and the US and NATO versus Russia over this Ukraine insanity, which
Yeah.
is literally the only word you can use is insanity.
What's up with that? Is that some more saber rattling? What's going on there?
I would say it's more saber rattling, but I would also say it's the American imperialist war machine just trying to continue to expand it. Because essentially, what's the premise behind it now is that the U.S. and NATO want Ukraine to join NATO. Of course, Ukraine being on Russia's border and all the anti-Russian propaganda that we've seen, over the past several years, simply because the U.S. is attempting to maintain its global supremacy and hegemony in the region, and Russia being their only major geopolitical adversary aside from China in that region. Um, it's just a whole bunch of anti-Russian propaganda going on, and so they wanted to try to get the Ukraine to join NATO, and Russia not too happy about that, very understandably. And so it started this whole like back and forth tit for tat thing. And then like a lot of my coverage has been sort of talking about the history of exactly what's been going on in this region well before now and how we got to this point. Because a lot of people, especially if you didn't study like geopolitics or just like regional politics in the Eastern European region, a lot of people, especially in America, where our media is so controlled, like it's because it's weird. A lot of people think we have a free press when it comes to the mainstream. We don't. They are very controlled. I have a over 4,000 word article on the freethoughtproject.com called How Truth Was Destroyed So Americans Would Crave Propaganda that you can read. All the listeners can go look it up. Where I go into the very detailed history of exactly how our media infrastructure apparatus was created, co opted, and infiltrated and controlled by intelligence assets, um, mainly the CIA, but also the Department of Defense, the State Department, even stretching back to Operation Paperclip, in which the Truman administration authorized thousands of actual Nazis to come to the United States of America, and he put them in NASA and the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, which is the predecessor to the CIA. And sort of how a lot of these like Nazi propaganda operations, like the ones utilized by Joseph Goebbels, sort of found their way into programs like Operation Mockingbird, which is essentially when the CIA infiltrated and took control over the U.S. mainstream media. So for a more, detailed history of all of that, definitely check out my article. It's called How Truth Was Destroyed So Americans Would Crave Propaganda. But getting back into Ukraine, with how controlled our information is here, a lot of people don't really know the details and the truth behind a lot of what happened there. So I'm sure some people might remember the 2014 crisis in which Crimea and Donbass was annexed by
Yeah.
Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So essentially, what brought that about was that the United States and other Western allies were supporting militias who were attempting to overthrow the government, essentially. And this should be, it was and is extremely controversial, but should be mentioned a lot more in Western media, especially with how the so called anti fascist social justice warriors have positioned themselves to supposedly be against all things they proclaim to be Nazism, because these paramilitaries and these militants that the US was supporting are actual self identified fascists. Like literally on their Wikipedia page, admit to being neo Nazis and neo Nazi supporters. Like they're very open with
Yeah.
how fascist these militias are. And these are the
That's the
militias.
is that the Azov Brigade?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Azov Brigade being one of them, and many others.
Yes. Okay.
Who are now completely integrated into the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian National Guard, the Ukrainian government. So essentially, what happened in 2014, February 2014, there was a Western-backed coup where Western
Yes.
forces backed these neo-fascist paramilitaries and helped them overthrow Ukraine's democratically elected government. Later that year, Crimea and Donbass did not want to recognize this new illegitimate fascist government. And Russia extended the olive branch, considering that those regions are extremely ethnically Russian. And of course, their history with being attached to the Soviet Union back in the day. They extended the olive branch. Hey, if you guys would like to secede and join the Russian Federation, we're all for that. And the people of Crimea were 100% in favor of doing this. It's not like what the New York Times and the Washington Post said, that the U.S. invaded Crimea and we're trying to protect the people. No, the people of Crimea wanted to leave Ukraine and join Russia. But of course, the story gets twisted to fit the imperialist agenda. And so that's what all of that started in 2014. Since then, it has been a cavalcade of nonstop support. Even with the, what's happening in Afghanistan and with the complete atrocities in Syria and Iraq and Libya and Yemen and everywhere else, the United States is, dropping bombs and senselessly murdering countless innocent people. In the background has always been Ukraine. Since that 2014 coup, the United States government, through the Obama administration, more during the Trump administration, and even more now during the Biden administration, has been providing arms and support and money and logistics training to these fascist militants who have a stranglehold on the Ukrainian government. And, so that goes to the point that I mentioned earlier. It's so strange to me, the doublespeak, that here in America we have this supposedly anti-fascist movement that spent years, rattling, we have to get fascists like Donald Trump out of office. And then, just for complete transparency, I want people to know I don't like Trump either. I don't like any president. Like I mentioned earlier, they're all puppets. Okay. But I think, especially here in the West, they watered down the term fascist so much that it lost a lot of meaning. And that's not a term that you can water down. It's a very strong, direct word that you do not attach to things unless it fits appropriately. You can't say, I disagree with your opinion, so you're a fascist. No, that use something else. Jerk, D-bag, I don't know, but not fascist, not Nazi. Those are very strong terms that need to be reserved for the worst of the worst people who actually fit that description. So because that term has been so watered down, I think, now you say, hey, the U.S. is over in Ukraine arming fascists, like actual Nazis. And it's just kind of shrugged off now. And that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Yeah. Wow, that was great. And I think a simple and easy to understand explanation of what was going on there, because I didn't know the whole deal, to be honest, because
Yeah.
I had pieces, but that was a time when I wasn't paying attention, so.
Yeah. I actually wrote a piece for Free Thought Project here recently. I believe the title goes something along the lines of, as tensions with Ukraine rise, the government admits to false flag operations. And that was essentially the premise of my article. Because see, at the Free Thought Project, I have this series called the Conspiracy Fact Series, which should have many more installations to it than it does. But things got put on the back burner because there was just breaking news after breaking news, and then some life events happened in my private life that just caused me to put these deep dive investigations sort of on the back burner. So recently, with my Ukraine false flag article, that's only installment number 2 to this greater series that I had planned on doing, and that I still will update.
Okay.
But essentially, what the article is about is that now the United States State Department, the Pentagon, and the mainstream media have come out and they said, oh, Russia is planning a false flag attack to frame Ukraine to justify an invasion. And like amidst all of the saber rattling and craziness about, you know, the US and NATO, you know, amassing troops on the border and all this other stuff, like it just kind of got swept under the rug that we now have mainstream media outlet Politico and CNN. CNN's the one that broke the friggin' story, using the term false flag operation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Admitting that it's a thing. And, you
Right.
know, after spending decades vilifying people like you, me, and anyone who dared mention this verified historical fact that false flags are a thing that governments use to precipitate war, you know, calling us conspiracy theorists and whatnot. And so that was kind of the point with my article that I wanted to drive home. And so, like, through the first half of it, I kind of gave a breakdown of what's happening in Ukraine and then put it in the context of, you know, now they're talking about false flags openly as if they never said you're a crazy wingnut conspiracy theorist if you talk about false flags. And then the latter half of the article, I go into a history of false flag operations and really giving detailed accounts of some of the most pivotal false flags that have taken place in our lifetime that have really shaped our geopolitical atmosphere. You know, I'd love to get into that a little bit if we have time, because, you know, like I said, covert operations is my forte. So, you know, I'd love to discuss stuff like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's, can we do a part 2 pretty soon here, Don?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Because I would love to, you know, and maybe even make it a regular thing, depending on the time interval. I think
Yeah.
that could be fun. But we got to get your Twitter up, man. Or I think it's your Twitter. We got to get your followers up. So go and follow Don on Twitter. He's at Don Vi Jr. DonViajr. And I'm gonna retweet them. I'll actually probably tweet some of those articles out and just put them in the show notes too that you mentioned
Thank
at the
you. I can
tail
send
end
them to
there.
you.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, please do. And then I'll try to add those to the show notes, and then I'll add those to my other channels, as it were.
Mhm.
But where do you want to direct people's attention to, Don? And how can people support you? Closing thoughts here, as we wrap up our first chat, probably of many, because like I said, I think because we're colleagues, I think that came about organically, and we really have uh, inquisitive, I think, similarities. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of these. But yeah,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, how can people support? And final thoughts here.
Well, the best way, I would say probably right now is you can find my channel Break the Matrix on Telegram at Break the Matrix News. Um, I am on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook, the same name, Break the Matrix.
Okay.
I am on Twitter, you know, at Don Vi Jr. And also I have a Break the Matrix channel.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
And I got your link tree in the
oh,
description box too.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, the link
Yep.
tree is also great. You can use the link tree and you can find pretty much any and everything. All of my social media links are in that link tree. So thank you, Addie, for providing that, because that's the best way to find literally anything.
Of course. And what about you got a Patreon or a buy me a coffee or a
I do not.
subscribe star?
I mean, I have a PayPal. So if people want to drop a
Okay.
few bucks in the PayPal, that'd be very much appreciated. Bills are tight.
Yeah, yeah. And that's on the link tree, the PayPal is?
Yes.
Okay, okay. I'll be sure to add that, so it's just one click away there, and people can donate. Thank you, Donna. It's a great show. Flew by, and like I said, I think we have a lot more shows in between us. So hopefully we can do that. And we're actually doing a kind of how to interview project, myself and this other journalist that I'm working with. So Don's going to be featured in that a bit there too. So thank you, Don. Thank you to the audience. Stay frosty, folks, and we will see everybody next time.